It began innocently and with a kind of cinematic ease, the way the best cons always do, with a story you wanted to believe. I was 29, newly tenured enough to know the ropes, but still pleasantly green about the ways office power folds and flexes. Marketing had been my field for 4 years and counting, earned late nights, ruined Saturday brunches poring over analytics, and an appreciation for the small victories. A well-timed post, a campaign that clicked, a client who sent a thank you. I liked that parts of my job felt like craftsmanship. We measured, we iterated, we polished. Then Lewis arrived. He did not come like a normal hire. He arrived like a social media profile. The LinkedIn language around him sounded like a press release. Influencer and content strategist with proven engagement. But he had other accoutrements beyond that tidy paragraph. A wardrobe that looked as if it had been carefully curated for camera angles. A succession of photos of him kneeling beside vaguely famous faces, and a conversational style sharpened by practice. He spoke as if every sentence might become a quote. He laughed as if a camera were waiting to catch it. Our manager, Harrison, loved that about him. Harrison was a numbers guy who secretly adored spectacle. He'd been a brand manager for decades and had a soft spot for anyone who seemed to bring the outside world spotlight into our middle market, national footprint company. When Harrison heard Lewis had real clout, his optimism had the quality of someone who'd just been handed a story with a bow. He welcomed Lewis as if the man were an acquisition. From the start, the arrangement was odd in practical ways. Lewis was the social media manager on paper, the title printed with ceremony and, briefly, access. But the contractor we had been using for social content, Blue Wave Social, continued to solve our briefs, attend our meetings, and deliver the posts. They acted like the hired hands had always been the hired hands. They had the calendar invites and the creative deliverables. Lewis was present in hallway banter and in an Instagram photo here and there, but not on the day-to-day work. People joked he was the face, and the team circulated the jibe with smiles and a shrug. It's easy, in hindsight, to chalk that up to startup culture's theater, the manager with his star, the agency with its workhorse musicians, the rest of us keeping the instruments tuned. Still, there were moments when the veneer thinned. During editorial calls, for example, Lewis would dominate with anecdotes about brand deals, all caps texts from agents, dinners with minor celebrities. He spoke landlord to landlord about partnerships as if contracts were a matter of charm. The emails he sent were polished, but when deadlines came around, the deliverables were always with Blue Wave, whose team were, tomorrow after tomorrow, producing the work. At first, the dissonance was charming. Lewis's stories about parties made our Slack channel livelier. He'd drop a photo of himself with someone vaguely identified as industry cred, and everyone would react with the amused envy office culture tends to reserve for anyone who appears to have an exciting life outside of spreadsheets. Yet for those of us who lived in the quieter corners of deliverables, his absence from the real work arsed toward worry. Hiring someone whose title implied hands-on content strategy, then watching a contractor do the heavy lifting week after week, raised eyebrows. We noticed. The manager didn't. Or perhaps he noticed and chose, quietly, to believe in the narrative Lewis sold. And then, on a Monday so clear-skied the office felt sharper, Harrison called an impromptu meeting. His face was pale in a way I'd never seen, a numerical man briefly stripped of his usual composure. "Tell Lewis to come see me the moment he's in," he said, the words clipped. It was a moment between heartbeats. People exchanged looks, and the joke about Lewis being the face dropped into a richer and more ominous register. We had been summoned to watch a scene begin. Lewis arrived late, as he always did, like someone who measures time by social engagements rather than by calendars. He came in with that same easy smile, his phone already beeping with the morning chorus of a life apparently full. Harrison didn't let the morning small talk anchor the moment. He asked Lewis into his office with a quiet insistence. We all, incredulous and a little giddy, watched the door close. Harrison called us in shortly after. He told the story in a voice that sounded, for once, as if the numbers had been stripped of all their comforting algebra. Over the weekend, Harrison had been in a meeting with a potential business partner, someone external to our day-to-day. Harrison, eager to impress, had introduced Lewis as a partner with a small content firm that our corporation had folded into. In other words, Harrison had introduced Lewis in a way that implied an existing corporate relationship between our company and Lewis's business. The other meeting participant had paused, brow furrowing. The air shifted as if someone had opened a window into a room that should have been private. The external partner asked a simple clarifying question. Had our company actually made that acquisition? Harrison, taken aback, was forced into the awkward position of speaking for a reality he did not control. He told us later that the partner's questions had been gentle, then confused. Harrison apologized, and the conversation ended. But Harrison couldn't dislodge the unease. It nagged at him enough to make him dig. What he dug up was not what he wanted to find. It started with a verification of Lewis's social footprint, basic checks, follower counts, engagement, brand deals. Numbers that, if honest, would have been visible to a routine background check. The results were not small anomalies. They were chasms. Lewis had followers, but the engagement patterns were odd. His comments were sparse, and the interactions looked curated rather than organic. A picture of him with a public figure, when traced, had been taken at one of those open, invitation-only charity parties. He'd slipped in, taken a selfie, and been politely shown the exit. A local executive we knew had, much to our surprise and dismay, taken issue with Lewis, and had a restraining order on record, not because our team had imagined a past, but because Lewis had in fact been known for trying to infiltrate events and executive lounges with a relentless, performative energy. It was not the discovery of a harmless exaggerator. It was the unmasking of a long, practiced performance where claims were built upon a sequence of small falsifications, appearing at other people's parties and taking a photo, claiming partnerships that never closed, positing acquisitions that were figments of social media theater. He had crafted a persona so precisely he nearly made himself convincing. But persona doesn't run an account. And when Harrison dug deeper, contacting Blue Wave Social, the contractor who had been doing the work, the story got worse. We thought he was the client. One of their account managers told Harrison. He emailed us, he paid invoices, at least he seemed to. We assumed he was the liaison. The contractor's voice on the call sounded like someone relieved to be counted into a truth. We were doing his job, she said. We were posting, creating content, replying to comments, everything, because the brief came from Lewis. We didn't realize he wasn't actually an influencer. We didn't realize he wasn't a real business owner. We just thought he was ahead of us, connected. The contractor's words landed like a book closing. Lewis had been, effectively, a middleman for his own non-existent business. The actual creative labor had been passed, week after week, to a vendor who did not conceive of itself as an employee, but who became, in effect, the person covering Lewis's absence. They believed he was a paying client. We believed we had a social media lead in-house. Harrison believed a story that flattered him. The truth was a seam that, once cut, exposed a whole lattice of assumptions. When Lewis was escorted out that afternoon, the office breathed like a body exhaling after inhaling too fast. The immediate pleasures of seeing the charade end were sharp. The relief was loud and buoyant. But the aftermath was not neat. We discovered that Lewis had taken the company laptop assigned to him and, after being formally asked to return it, had mailed it back, wiped clean. He had deleted local files, cleared caches, and in one small, bitter stroke included in his exit a piece of the chaos he'd been living. Harrison threatened legal action and demanded returns. The laptop arrived weeks later, scrubbed and blunt in its finality. HR and legal got involved. They reviewed contracts, communications, and background checks. They found, piece by piece, that many of Lewis's supposed credentials had been built on theatrical moments rather than sustained relationships. He had been able to fool some of us because our hiring process had been, in that year, a little starved for rigor. The position had been approved with a budget line and an eager manager. In the hunger to have a forward-facing showman on the payroll, due diligence had been light. That should have been the end of it. Lewis leaves. The company patches policy. The story becomes a cautionary anecdote told at holiday parties. But there's always another beat in these tales. a final ripple where the water rearranges itself and reveals something else lurking on the surface. In our case, the ripple was a quiet, small confession from Blue Wave Social. One of their account managers, in a private message, confessed she had been embarrassed. "We thought we were doing the work for an influencer," she wrote. "We thought we were a vendor to a person who had deals and cameras. In truth, we were just doing the work for someone who enjoyed playing the part." She sent us screenshots, emails, invoices, meeting invites that showed Lewis had indeed forwarded briefs to them and had signaled payment in ways that seemed legitimate. Blue Wave had processed the offers because they trusted the apparent authority Lewis wielded. They had become co-conspirators in the behavior without knowing it. That confession led to a new layer of reaction inside our team. Some people felt anger at Blue Wave for not better vetting the person they contracted with. Others felt sympathy for them. When you trace blame in a social economy, the arrows bend toward the places where the light isn't shining, toward human error, toward institutional laziness, toward the seductive allure of a persona. The contractor had not been malicious. They had been the boots on the ground who did the work Lewis pretended to do. In quieter corridors, I heard people trying to make sense of why we'd all been fooled. That question felt like a philosophical fever. Why had ambition and charm been permitted to outpace competence? Why had Harrison, someone who could usually see through a spreadsheet, been so willing to be dazzled? My own answer, which formed slowly as the days realigned, was simple and awkward. We were all human. We wanted a story. We preferred a story that offered a shortcut to cachet over the slow, unglamorous work of verification. We rewarded performance because, in a parched office culture, spectacle felt like oxygen. There were practical consequences. HR reviewed the hiring and onboarding process, tightened background checks for public-facing hires, and added contractual clauses requiring proof of prior engagements for any influencer or contractor partnerships. The legal team prepared a memo on device returns and data hygiene. Blue Wave Social requested better client verification mechanisms for future vendors. Harrison apologized in a company-wide town hall, face measured, voice steady, but honest. "We were taken," he said. "We liked the story more than the evidence." It was a rare corporate mea culpa. But the human consequences were more stubborn. People who'd been charmed by Lewis felt embarrassed. Those who'd quietly suspected fraud felt vindicated and also tired. The team's morale shifted in subtle ways. Some employees leaned in less eagerly toward flashy initiatives, asking more pointed questions. Meeting agendas became heavier with verification tasks. We were no longer a group that would assume truth from style alone. As for Lewis, he boarded a plane the afternoon after his firing. The rumor was that he flew back across the country and never looked back. He had left behind a trail of small dishonors, a wiped laptop, a few unpaid invoices relitigated, and the faint echo of a persona whose edges blurred under scrutiny. We never saw him again. In some ways, his disappearance was the most dramatic punctuation of the whole story. No courtroom, no theatrical exit, only the cold civility of a canceled email and a man who chose disappearance as the final flourish. Months later, the story revealed a last, strange refrain. An old executive, someone who had once scolded Lewis for trying to crash a boardroom event, sent an email to Harrison. He'd heard about the episode and, with a lent patience, sent a note. "We've seen this pattern before," he wrote. "Not all charmers mean harm. Some are simply lost. If you have contact details, consider sending a message that will stick. Verify before you hire, and give a chance to those willing to learn. Don't brand them as monsters if they can change. There's a humanity in both caution and in mercy." The sentiment landed like a final, soft bell. It wasn't a license to be careless. It wasn't an absolution for Lewis's deception. But it was a reminder that corporate theater and human life are messy things. People stunt for attention sometimes because they've learned it keeps them afloat, and sometimes because they don't know another way to be valued. We tighten our processes, and, in the same breath, try to keep a small place for redemption in case a person wanted to build competency instead of a persona. The final lessons were practical and moral. Practically, we implemented stricter vetting for public-facing roles, proof of prior partnerships, cross-verified contact information, and a policy that contractors should be able to verify their clients before beginning work. We stopped assuming that glossy photos equaled credentials. Morally, the team learned an awkward humility about our appetite for a story. We learned to ask for evidence in a world that equates confidence with competence. That rebalance was small, but, I think, essential. For me, it was a profound little lesson about the work of staying clear-headed in an environment designed to distract. I had fallen for a charm, if only in the sense that I had let curiosity outpace verification. I'd wanted the company to have a face that would be recognized beyond our industry trade shows. I'd wanted the work to feel exciting, and I'd been willing, for a time, to prioritize sparkle over stewardship. The episode left a scar in our memory, not a scream, but a bruise, a place that still twinges when someone arrives with too deliberate shine. But it also taught us to rebuild processes with intelligence and compassion. The company moved on, clients continued to sign contracts, campaigns still rolled out. Blue Wave Social stayed on as a vendor under clearer terms. Harrison regained some of his footing. Every now and then, when I see a smiling influencer post or an enthusiastic LinkedIn proclaiming a partnership, I hear that small voice that asks, what is the evidence behind the story? It's not a cynicism, exactly. It's a caution. The world offers us many storytellers, and the best way to honor our work and our clients is to ask for the receipts, even when the story is sweet, even when the tale tastes like champagne. Lewis's final lesson, whether intentional or not, was blunt. Persona can open doors, but it cannot do the work. If you build a house of charm, be ready to explain how it stands when the contractor leaves. And if you are the person tempted to trade competence for performance, consider a smaller, steadier path. Learn the craft so your stories are supported by the labor that makes them real. The office moved on, but the story stayed with us. Less as gossip now and more as instruction. We're told like a small parable. Check the followers, verify the deal, and remember that sometimes the most valuable thing you can bring to work is the patience to do the actual work, day by day, quietly, and without a camera.